Get down. The warning came too late. The crystal chandelier screamed as its chain snapped, and the air split with the sound of tearing metal. Glass rained like cold stars, and the ballroom gasped as one body moved while 1,000 froze. Queen Lyra did not see the falling light. She saw the man behind her step forward, shoulder turning, arm lifting, as if he had done this before. As if saving her was a habit he never broke. The chandelier struck the marble where she had stood a breath ago. The shockwave rolled through silk and gold, and the crowd fell to its knees. Smoke rose, music died. Somewhere a woman cried out her name. When the dust thinned, Lyra stood untouched, her blue gown torn only at the hem, sapphire necklace still cold against her throat. The tiara sat straight, her heart did not. She turned slowly, already knowing, already afraid of the answer. Behind her stood a human in a sharp military uniform, his face pale, his eyes steady, his arm bleeding where glass had kissed skin. He looked older than memory and younger than legend, and the sight of him cracked something open in her chest. "Evan," she whispered. No one heard her, or maybe everyone did. Guards surged in, weapons raised, voices sharp. The two women in lavender, Lady Myra and Lady Sira, closed in at Lyra's sides, hands trembling as they searched her face for wounds. The distinguished crowd pressed back beneath the golden walls, staring at the human as if he were a ghost who had learned to breathe. Evan lowered his arm, blood tracing a line down his cuff. He did not bow, he did not smile. He simply met Lyra's gaze, and the years between them folded like paper. She had been a prisoner the last time she saw him. He had been nothing but a soldier with empty pockets and stubborn hope. How had he found her again, and why now, when the palace itself seemed to turn against her? "Secure the hall," Lyra said, her voice calm as ice. "No one leaves." The order snapped the guards into motion. The doors sealed. The chandelier lay shattered, a crown broken at her feet. Evan took one step back, as if to give her space. The movement cut deeper than the glass. Did he think she would send him away? Did he think she had forgotten the night on the ice, the fire, the choice? She remembered everything. She remembered the crash on the frozen plain, the alien sky burning green, the pain that took her breath. She remembered waking to human hands shaking as they worked, to a voice that promised she would live even if he did not. She remembered Evan carrying her across miles of death, bleeding, freezing, refusing to stop. She remembered whispering a vow she never thought she would be allowed to keep. Now the vow stood before her, real and breathing, and the palace felt suddenly too small. "Why are you here?" she asked, keeping her voice steady for the court. Evan's eyes flicked to the shattered chandelier, then back to her. "Because someone wanted you dead," he said simply, "and because I was told you would be." A murmur rippled through the hall. Lyra felt it like a tide pulling at her ankles. Who would dare strike at a coronation ball? Who knew her steps, her timing, the exact place she would stand? "And who told you?" she asked. Evan hesitated, just a fraction, enough. "An old debt," he said, "and a warning." "From where? From whom? And why bring a human into a war of crowns?" Lyra stepped closer to him, ignoring the sharp intake of breath from her court. She saw the scar at his jaw now, thin and white, one she had never seen before. How much had he lost while she ruled in safety? "Did you come to save me?" she asked softly, "or to finish something you started?" His mouth tightened, and for a moment the soldier cracked and the man showed through. "I came," he said, "because last time you saved me too." The hall held its breath. Lyra felt the weight of every eye, every secret, every blade still hidden. She lifted her hand, fingers brushing the sapphire at her throat, and wondered which of them had placed the target there. When she spoke again, it was not for the court. It was for the human who had once carried her through fire. "Then stay," she whispered, "because this time I think the palace itself is lying." And as the guards dragged a trembling servant from the shadows, Lyra knew one truth with chilling clarity. The attempt on her life was not the beginning. It was the answer to a question she had not yet learned how to ask. The servant screamed as the guards pulled him forward, but Lyra barely heard it. Her eyes stayed on Evan, on the quiet tension in his shoulders, As if danger was a language his body spoke without sound. "Take him to the lower chambers," she ordered. "Gently, if he breaks, I want it to be from truth, not fear." The guards hesitated, surprised by the mercy in her tone, then obeyed. The crowd watched in uneasy silence as the servant vanished beyond the gilded doors, leaving behind the broken chandelier and a question no one dared ask aloud. Lyra turned back to Evan. Up close, she saw the exhaustion he carried like a second uniform. This was not the face of a man who traveled in peace. This was the face of someone hunted. "You are injured," she said. "It's nothing," Evan replied, though his blood told a different story. She reached out without thinking, fingers brushing his sleeve. The contact was brief, almost nothing, yet the room seemed to tilt. He flinched, not from pain, but from memory, and that hurt more than the glass ever could. "Come with me," Lyra said. "Both of you," she added to Myra and Sira. "The court can wait." She did not wait for permission. Queens did not need it. They moved through hidden corridors carved into the palace bones, where light dimmed and echoes grew honest. Guards followed at a distance, close enough to protect, far enough to pretend privacy existed. At last, Lyra stopped in a quiet chamber lined with blue stone. A healing table waited in the center, unused, patient. She gestured for Evan to sit. "You still don't like orders," he said, a faint smile tugging at his mouth. "You still follow them anyway," she replied. Myra tended his arm with practiced care, sealing the cuts with glowing gel. Evan watched Lyra the entire time, as if looking away might make her vanish again. She felt the same fear twist in her chest. "You said someone warned you," Lyra said once the door was sealed. "Tell me now without riddles." Evan's jaw tightened. It wasn't a name, it was a signal. Human channels, encrypted old style, only used when someone wants to disappear afterward. "Disappearing usually means guilt," Sira said quietly. "Or survival," Evan answered. Lyra folded her hands, steadying herself. "Why come alone?" "I didn't," he said. "I came quiet." That raised more questions than it answered. How many humans were hiding inside her palace walls? How many aliens were not who they claimed to be? "After the ice plane," Lyra said softly, "I searched for you." Evan looked away. The silence stretched, heavy and full of things neither of them wanted to touch. "I heard," he said, "from a distance." "You could have answered." "I was told not to." "Told by whom?" Lyra pressed. He exhaled slowly. "Your enemies." The words settled like ash. Lyra stood, packing once, then stopping before him again. "Explain." "They knew what you would become," Evan said. "They knew a human who saved you would matter, so they erased me, or tried to." Lyra's breath caught. All this time they were watching. "Yes," he said, "and waiting for you to wear a crown." The room felt colder. The palace stones no longer felt like shelter, but like a carefully painted trap. A chime echoed faintly through the chamber walls. Myra stiffened. "Interrogation chamber," she said. "The servant is asking for you." Lyra met Evan's eyes again. "Stay here," she said. "I can help," he replied. "You already have," she said gently. "Now trust me." Trust, the word lingered between them, fragile and old. She turned to leave, then paused. "Evan," she said, her voice barely above a breath, "if I had found you back then, would you have stayed?" He did not answer right away. When he did, it was honest and quiet. "I would have burned worlds to stand where I am now." Lyra left before her composure broke. The interrogation chamber was smaller, darker. The servant sat shaking, eyes darting like a trapped animal. When he saw Lyra, something close to relief crossed his face. "I didn't know it would fall," he sobbed. "I swear, I only loosened the chain." "For whom?" Lyra asked. He swallowed. "For the Silent Circle." The name hit like a blade. An ancient group. Whispers and shadows. A myth used to frighten children and silence rebels. "They promised me safety," the servant continued. "They said the human would die too." Lyra's heart pounded. "You were wrong." "Yes," he whispered, "and now they will kill me." Lyra stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Or I will protect you." The servant looked up, hope flickering. "You can't," he said. "They are already inside." The lights flickered once, then again. Far away, an alarm began to scream. And Lyra realized with sudden clarity that saving her life had only been the first move. The real game was just beginning. The alarm echoed through the palace like a heartbeat gone wrong. Lyra's heels clicked against the marble floor as she moved back toward the grand ballroom, every instinct screaming that the danger was no longer a threat to a single chandelier. It was a storm sweeping through her entire court. Evan followed silently, his hand brushing hers for a moment as they passed the corridor. That single contact sent a rush of memory through Lyra, how he had carried her across the frozen plains, how his hands had been steady even when the ice threatened to claim them both. She had never imagined she could feel that pull again, not in a palace filled with glittering walls and veiled threats. When they emerged, the ballroom was no longer a place of grandeur but a battlefield of whispers and movement. Guards patrolled in tense lines, guests crouched behind tables, and somewhere in the shadows, figures moved too quickly to identify. Golden light reflected off shattered crystal, sending fractured patterns across walls that seemed suddenly hostile. "Silent circle," Evan muttered. "They've already infiltrated." Lyra's gaze hardened. "Show yourself," she commanded, her voice cutting through the tension. The room stilled for a heartbeat, as if waiting for her words to summon the enemy. Instead, a shadow flickered along the far wall, a figure dressed in dark robes, faceless under a hood, gliding rather than walking. The crowd murmured, fear rippling like waves, but Lyra stepped forward. Her blue gown swayed, her sapphire necklace glinting like a beacon, her tiara a crown not just of power but of defiance. "You think this is a game," she said, "but you've forgotten who I am." The figure paused, just long enough to let the crowd see a hand rise, holding a device that pulsed with an eerie green light. Lyra's eyes flicked to Evan, who already had his stance, ready to intercept any strike. Their unspoken understanding, born from survival and years apart, filled the space between them. "You cannot touch her," Evan said, voice low and dangerous. "Move and you will regret it." The figure tilted its head, a subtle acknowledgement, then the green pulse expanded into the room. Instantly, the golden light of chandeliers dimmed, shadows stretching unnaturally, creeping along walls and floors like dark water. Guests screamed, some frozen in place as if paralyzed by the light. Lyra felt a cold surge of fear, but not for herself. For Evan, for the human who had once carried her through death, who now stood between her and the unknown. "Move," she shouted, grabbing his arm. "We need the inner chamber." They ran, weaving through toppled chairs and terrified courtiers. Shadows flickered, reaching for them, but Evan's presence was a shield, his body cutting through the darkness with unwavering determination. Lyra's heart pounded, not just with fear, but with a wild relief. He had returned. He was here, and for reasons she did not yet understand, he had come for her, not as a protector of the palace, but as a guardian of her life. They reached the inner chamber and slammed the doors shut. The shadows clawed at the edges, leaving deep black streaks across the polished wood. Breathing heavily, Lyra leaned against the door. "Why are they after me?" she demanded. "I've ruled this planet for years. I've faced enemies. Why now?" Evan wiped blood from a shallow cut on his cheek, his gaze steady, unflinching. "Because they see you as more than a queen," he said. "They see you as the key, and they know if they take you, they take everything you've built." Lyra's sapphire necklace caught the faint light as she placed a trembling hand on it. "Then we fight," she whispered. "We fight, and we make them regret ever touching this palace or me." A flicker of fear passed through Evan's eyes, quickly replaced by resolve. "I promised I'd never leave you," he said, "even if it's the last thing I do." Lyra looked at him then, really looked, and felt the weight of years collapse into a single moment. She could not speak. She could only whisper, the sound trembling but certain, "Thank you for finding me." The shadows surged against the door again, harder this time, testing the walls, testing their resolve. Lyra drew in a sharp breath. Her crown was heavy, yes, but heavier still was the choice that lay before her. Rule with fear or fight with the human who had once risked everything to save her. And as Evan moved closer, standing by her side, she realized that the answer was already clear. The battle was no longer just for a throne. It was for every life she cared about, and this time she would not face it alone. The shadows hissed, the sapphire glimmered, and the alien queen, reunited with the human who had once saved her life, knew that every whisper of fear would soon be drowned by the roar of defiance. The inner chamber was small, but it felt impossibly vast. The shadows pressed against the walls, dark and hungry, yet Lyra could feel Evan's steady presence beside her, a lifeline that stretched across the years they had lost. Every inch of the room was heavy with tension, the air thick with fear and unspoken memories. Lyra sank onto a velvet chaise, smoothing her gown as if the act could steady her heart. Evan crouched beside her, fingers brushing hers for a fleeting second, grounding them both. "They're not just after you," he said quietly. "They want the information you carry, the plans, the alliances, the old treaties that could change entire worlds." Lyra's sapphire necklace gleamed under the faint light of the chamber, casting fractured blue patterns across the walls. She traced the edges of the jewels with trembling fingers, remembering nights spent signing accords she barely understood, nights spent dreaming of peace that always seemed just out of reach. "And you," she said softly, "why risk yourself again? You've already given me your life once." Evan's gaze met hers, unwavering. "Because some debts aren't about life or death," he said. "Some debts are about loyalty, about what matters." Lyra swallowed, her throat tight. She remembered the frozen plain, the fire, the wind that could have stolen her forever. She remembered his hands holding hers, steady, unyielding, a promise she hadn't dared to hope for again. And now here he was, decades older yet unchanged in the ways that mattered most. A faint tapping echoed from the far wall. Both of them froze. The servant they had questioned earlier, trembling, appeared in the doorway. His eyes darted between them, guilt and fear written in every line of his face. "They're inside the palace," he stammered. "They're waiting for a distraction to get to you." Lyra stood, her voice sharp, commanding, yet threaded with exhaustion. "Then we give them none." Evan followed her gaze to the wall, then back to her. "Lyra, if we go back out there, it won't just be a fight for the palace. It'll be a fight for your life, for everything you've built." "I know," she whispered, and yet she felt no fear, not with him here, not when he had returned to her. They moved together to a side corridor, a secret passage known only to the royal family. The walls were lined with mirrors, reflecting their images infinitely, fractured but still recognizable. Lyra's eyes caught her own reflection beside Evan, and for the first time in years, she felt the weight of solitude lift, replaced by an unspoken strength. "They've been planning this for months," Evan said. "They knew the moment you took the throne, they waited for the right chance." Lyra's fingers tightened around his arm. "Then we make our chance first." A sudden movement caught their eyes, a shadow flickering in the hallway ahead. Without hesitation, Evan drew his weapon, the metal gleaming. Lyra, heart pounding, drew on her own training, a queen who had learned to wield power in ways that extended beyond mere authority. The figure lunged, a silent assassin clad in black, moving with impossible speed. Evan intercepted first, his body colliding with the intruder while Lyra's hand went to her sapphire necklace. A flash of light erupted, momentarily blinding the corridor, and the assassin recoiled, unprepared for the unexpected. Breathing heavily, Lyra and Evan stood over the fallen figure. The hood had slipped, revealing a familiar face. A former counselor she had trusted, now corrupted by the Silent Circle's promises. "You," Lyra whispered, shock and anger warring within her. "You betrayed us." "I serve the future," the counselor spat, eyes wild. "A future without weakness. A human savior is not part of it." Lyra's heart sank, not just because of the betrayal, but because the enemy had been closer than she ever imagined. Closer than the chandeliers, closer than the guards, closer even than the whispers of courtly flattery. Evan's hand rested lightly on her back, grounding her. "We'll fix this," he said, "together." Lyra looked at him, and for the first time the weight of the crown felt lighter. The sapphire glimmered between them, not just a jewel but a beacon. She realized then that survival was no longer enough. She had to fight, not just for the throne, but for every life the Silent Circle threatened, and for the human who had once risked everything to save her. The corridors stretched ahead, dark and uncertain. But Lyra and Evan, side by side, understood one truth above all. Shadows could chase them, assassins could strike, and betrayals could cut deep. But as long as they faced it together, nothing could break the bond forged in frozen plains and whispered promises. And in that quiet, powerful understanding, Lyra whispered once more, almost to herself, "I won't let you go, not again." Evan's hand squeezed hers. No words were needed. They were ready to face whatever came next. The Silent Circle would learn soon enough that the queen they sought to destroy had returned, and she was no longer alone. The palace had never felt more like a trap. Every corridor seemed longer, every doorway a potential ambush, and every flicker of golden light now held a shadow that could strike at any second. Yet Lyra walked steadily, Evan at her side, each step a defiance of the fear that threatened to choke the court. They reached the Hall of Mirrors, a place of legend where royal decrees had once been signed, and where conspiracies often whispered themselves into existence. The mirrors reflected hundreds of Lyra's images, multiplied endlessly, each one a queen poised and calm. But Evan saw only the real her, unguarded and fragile behind the sapphire and silk. "They're everywhere," Evan murmured, scanning the hall. "Silent Circle isn't just in the palace. They've infiltrated the city, the military, maybe even your council." Lyra's fingers tightened around her sapphire necklace. "Then we draw them out. If they want to strike, they will have to come through me." A shiver ran down Evan's spine. The words carried the weight of someone who had once seen death too close, yet now heard it spoken as inevitability. "And if they outnumber us?" Lyra met his gaze. Her blue eyes were piercing, commanding, a queen who had been shaped by fire, betrayal, and loss. "Then we fight smarter." Before Evan could respond, a mirror shattered in a burst of green light. A dozen figures emerged, robes flowing, faces hidden beneath hoods. The Silent Circle had arrived. Lyra moved first. She drew herself up, every movement precise, every gesture a command. The hall, though vast, now seemed to narrow into the battlefield of her choosing. Evan stayed close, weapon ready, watching her as she took the lead, his presence a constant shield. "Step away from her," Evan growled. The figures hesitated, and in that split second, Lyra's sapphire glowed. She lifted a hand, and a wave of energy pulsed outward, refracting through the mirrors, disorienting the attackers. Glass exploded, shards spinning like frozen stars. The Silent Circle members fell back, eyes wide with shock. Evan used the opening, striking with precision, incapacitating two assailants before they could recover. Lyra's gown shimmered as she moved, her platinum hair catching fragments of light. She was more than a queen here, she was a force of nature. But the battle was only beginning. More figures surged from hidden corridors, and the hall filled with chaos. Shouts, the clashing of metal, the sharp scent of ozone from their weapons, it all pressed in on her. Yet through it, Lyra's eyes never left Evan. He fought not just to protect her, but because she had once saved him, and now she needed him again. Each move he made was careful, controlled, a dance with death that left neither room for error nor hesitation. Amid the fight, Lyra spotted the lead of the Silent Circle, a tall figure whose hood had fallen, revealing a familiar face. Her former advisor, the one she had trusted above all, now wielded power against her. "You should have stayed hidden," she shouted over the din. "You should have forgotten me." The advisor laughed, a sound hollow and cruel. "You underestimate the weight of human interference, Queen. One man cannot stand against centuries of planning." Lyra's sapphire necklace pulsed again, and this time Evan understood. The energy wasn't just for defense. It was a weapon, one that could turn the tide. But it also came at a cost, one Lyra bore silently. "Evan," she whispered, almost to herself, almost a warning. He caught the glance, reading her perfectly. "I'm with you," he said, voice steady despite the chaos around them. Lyra took a deep breath, then released a pulse of light so intense that it fractured the mirrors completely, blinding the Silent Circle temporarily. The sound of breaking glass filled the hall like thunder, and for a moment silence followed, as if the palace itself held its breath. When the attackers regained their footing, Lyra and Evan were gone from the center of the hall, already moving toward the palace's secret passageways. They had survived, yes, but the battle had only reminded them how fragile safety truly was. As they paused in a shadowed corridor, Lyra leaned against the wall, breathing heavily. "Every answer brings another question," she said quietly, echoing a truth she had learned long ago. Evan rested a hand on her shoulder. "Then we find the answers together." And in that moment, surrounded by the echoes of shattered mirrors and the distant cries of chaos, Lyra realized something deeper than strategy or survival. The human who had once saved her life had returned, not for glory, not for orders, but for her. And that bond, their bond, was stronger than any shadow, any assassin, any silent circle plan. Even as the palace trembled around them, she knew one unshakable truth. The fight was far from over, but she would never face it alone again. The secret corridors of the palace were dimly lit, shadows stretching long and uneven along the stone walls. Lyra's breath came in steady, deliberate pulls, each one a tether keeping her grounded amidst the chaos that still raged in the grand halls behind them. Evan's presence was a constant at her side, quiet, unwavering, and in that silence she felt a fragile comfort she had not allowed herself in years. "They'll regroup," Evan said softly, his eyes scanning the narrow passages. "They always do." Lyra nodded, though her mind was elsewhere. She traced the outline of her sapphire necklace with trembling fingers, recalling the night she had first been saved on the frozen plains, when the human who now walked beside her had defied impossible odds to keep her alive. Back then, she had been a girl lost to the alien sky, terrified and fragile. Now she was a queen, powerful, yes, but equally vulnerable because she could not forget the man who had once carried her through death. "You should have left," she murmured finally, voice barely above the whisper of their footsteps. "I didn't," Evan replied. No pride, no boasting, just the quiet certainty of someone who had chosen once and would choose again. "You mattered then, you matter now." Lyra's throat tightened. She had ruled empires, commanded fleets, negotiated peace between worlds, yet in this moment it was the weight of human loyalty, not political power, that struck her the hardest. "And yet," she said, her gaze falling to the floor, "every time I find you, there's more danger. I keep thinking maybe it's better if I face it alone." Evan stopped, turning to face her fully, his hand lifted, brushing her cheek with careful reverence. "You never face anything alone," he said firmly. "Not now, not ever. I promised that once, remember." The words struck her like the sharp wind of the plains she had long ago survived. She remembered his promise, the struggle against ice and fire, the determination that had seemed unbreakable even then. And now, standing in the shadowed corridors of her palace, she felt the weight of that promise anew, an unspoken vow binding their fates. A faint sound echoed from ahead, a low murmur, almost indistinguishable from the palace itself, but Lyra's instincts flared. She moved forward, Evan close behind, as the corridor opened into a small chamber lined with tapestries depicting the history of her lineage. The room smelled of old stone and candle wax, a quiet contrast to the chaos outside. A figure emerged from the far corner, shrouded in black. Lyra's hand instinctively went to her necklace, the sapphire glowing faintly in response. "Who are you?" she demanded, voice steady though her heart raced. The figure lifted a hood, revealing the face of an older human, a former ally turned traitor, a man whose ambition had once mirrored hers. "Queen Lyra," he said smoothly, "you have something that belongs to me." "And you will take it," Lyra countered, her tone sharp as steel. "Do you not see what you risk?" "I see everything," he replied. "I see the human who saved you, I see your power, and I see a future where I decide who lives and who dies." Evan stepped forward, placing himself between Lyra and the traitor. "Not today," he said quietly, "not while I still breathe." The man smirked, underestimating the quiet strength of the human who had once carried a queen through death. Lyra felt her chest tighten, not from fear, but from a fierce clarity. She could fight with armies, with allies, with the machinery of her rule. But none of it mattered if she did not fight for this moment, for the man who had never left her side, even when he had every reason to. Energy flared from the sapphire, sending shards of light dancing across the tapestries. The traitor recoiled, but the human at her side stood unwavering, ready to shield her from whatever came next. Lyra reached for his hand, fingers intertwining with his. We are stronger together, she whispered. Do you feel that? The past, the promise, it's all here. Evan's grip tightened. I feel it, he said, and I'm not letting go. A sudden rumble shook the chamber. The palace itself seemed to protest, walls trembling with the echo of distant conflict. Lyra's eyes met Evan, and in that shared glance, a silent agreement passed between them. Whatever came next, whatever dangers awaited, they would face it side by side. The traitor raised his hand, energy crackling around him, ready to strike. But Lyra stepped forward, sapphire blazing, Evan beside her. Two hearts, two souls, united by trust and history, ready to meet the storm together. And in that moment, Lyra realized that survival was no longer enough. She wanted more. She wanted the human who had once saved her life to remain forever at her side. Whatever the silent circle had planned, whatever shadows lingered, she was no longer alone. And this time she would not whisper her gratitude in secret. She would fight for it. She whispered it anyway. Thank you for coming back to me. Evan's hand squeezed hers in reply, and together they faced the approaching storm. The grand ballroom had transformed into a battlefield of light and shadow. Golden chandeliers swayed above, fragments of crystal scattered like fallen stars, and the echo of the silent circle's assault filled the air with a tension so thick it seemed to press against every wall. Lyra stepped forward, her blue gown catching the fractured light, sapphire necklace gleaming like a pulse of defiance, as she surveyed the chaos. Evan was at her side, every movement precise, every glance protective. He had become more than a guardian. He was a part of her, a living tether to a past she had thought lost. The crowd of courtiers and guards had taken cover, whispers of fear rippling through the shattered hall, but Lyra's gaze was fixed on the advancing enemies. They think they can take me, she whispered to Evan, voice calm yet laced with fire. They think they can take us. They're wrong, Evan said simply, because we fight together. The first wave of attackers surged forward, their robes flowing like black smoke, their faces hidden beneath hoods. Lyra lifted her hand, sapphire gleaming, and a pulse of energy shot outward, refracting across the broken mirrors and chandeliers, disorienting the silent circle. Glass exploded in shards, catching the light like frozen stars, and the enemies faltered. Evan struck then with controlled precision, disarming two assailants and sending them sprawling. He moved like a shadow, but one that belonged beside her, not against her. Lyra's pulse quickened, not from fear, but from the relief and power of having him near. He had returned, and he had never wavered. From the far end of the ballroom, a figure stepped forward, hood falling to reveal the traitor who had tried to infiltrate the palace corridors. His face was twisted with greed and ambition, eyes flickering with unnatural energy. You cannot win, Lyra, he spat. Not with him by your side. Lyra stepped closer, sapphire blazing, her voice cutting through the roar of chaos. I have already won, she said. I survived once, and now I fight with the one who saved me, who always believed I could. The traitor's energy flared, green light crackling around his hands. Shadows lengthened, slithering across the marble like living darkness. But Lyra did not falter. She reached out to Evan, their fingers intertwining, a silent bond stronger than any spell, stronger than any weapon. Together, she whispered. Always, he replied, his voice low and steady. Energy erupted from the sapphire necklace, pure and unrelenting, colliding with the green pulse of the traitor. Light and shadow tangled in the air, throwing the ballroom into dazzling chaos. Screams echoed, metal clanged, and for a moment it seemed as if the palace itself might crumble under the force. But Lyra's resolve held firm. Step by step, they advanced together, light against shadow, human and queen bound by trust and history. The traitor faltered, staggering back as the combined force of their will and energy pushed him to the edge of defeat. And then it was over. The green light collapsed into darkness, the silent circle's members fleeing or lying unconscious. The chandeliers swung gently, dust falling like soft rain, and the ballroom, though scarred, stood. The enemies had underestimated her, underestimated the bond between human and queen. Lyra turned to Evan, chest heaving, sapphire necklace still glowing faintly. She reached up, brushing a stray lock of platinum hair from her face. You saved me again. she whispered, voice thick with emotion, awe and gratitude intertwined. Evan shook his head, a small, tired smile on his lips. You saved yourself, he said. I just made sure you had the chance. She shook her head, tears threatening to fall. No, she said softly, almost to herself. It's more than that. You were here when I needed you most. I can't ever repay that. Evan's hand lifted to cup her cheek. Then don't. Stay with me. That's enough. Lyra swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the crown, the sapphire, the entire palace. And yet in that moment, none of it mattered as much as the human before her. She leaned into his hand, their foreheads touching lightly, and whispered the words she had kept close for decades. Thank you for never letting me face it alone. Evan smiled, eyes soft with an emotion deeper than words could hold. I promised, he said simply. The ballroom was quiet now, broken but unbowed, light refracting across shattered mirrors and crystal shards. Outside, the first hints of dawn crept across the alien sky, painting the palace in pale gold. Lyra looked out over the horizon, then back at Evan, feeling the depth of every choice, every risk, every whispered promise that had led them here. She had been saved once, yes, but now she realized salvation was not a single act. It was the return, the presence, the unwavering loyalty of someone who had crossed impossible distances and survived countless threats, all to stand by her side. Lyra took a deep breath, lifting her chin. Her voice, though quiet, carried the authority of a queen and the intimacy of a heart finally unburdened. Together, she said. Forever, Evan replied. And in the shattered light of the ballroom, amid the echoes of past danger and whispered promises, the alien queen and the human who had once saved her life finally found their peace. Not in solitude, not in power, but in each other. The silent circle had failed, the palace had endured, and a bond forged in fire, ice, and unwavering loyalty had become something unbreakable. Lyra whispered again, this time with certainty, to no one but the man who had returned to her. Never again alone. Evan's hand tightened over hers, and together they stepped forward into the rising sun, into a future they would face side by side.